Sunday dinners used to mean comfort. The smell of roasted chicken, soft jazz from the kitchen radio, my daughter Sophia setting the table, my grandkids whispering secrets and giggling. It was the one time of the week I could pretend that we were still a family. That illusion ended the night my son Brian looked across the table and called me a loser. He said it like a fact, not an insult, flat casual, as if he were reading the weather report. "You're a loser, Mom," he said. "Carol's the kind of mother I wish I'd had." The sound didn't echo. It sliced through the room like a clean knife. His fork clattered onto the plate, and the silence that followed felt heavier than the air itself. I didn't hear Sophia gasp or see my grandkids freeze mid-bite. All I could see was Brian, my only son, the same boy I once held after 16 hours of labor, the boy who clung to me through broken bones, schoolyard fights, and the wreckage of a divorce that nearly killed me. And now he looked at me like I was something he'd scraped off his shoe. Sophia's voice cracked first. "Brian, how could you say that?" He shrugged, chewing like nothing had happened. Across the table, Carol, my ex-husband's new wife, smiled with that polite smugness she'd perfected over the years. She dabbed the corners of her mouth with one of my linen napkins, the ones I had paid for. "You always ruin everything," Brian muttered. "We invite you, and somehow it turns into a pity party." No one moved. The only sound was the slow clink of silverware and the faint hum of the ceiling fan. I sat there in the same chair I once rocked him to sleep in, staring at the man my son had become, and realizing I didn't recognize him anymore. He wasn't always like this. Or maybe he was, and I'd just refused to see it. For the first time I looked at him, not as a mother looks at her child, but the way you might look at a stranger who just pushed you off a cliff and walked away. Something inside me cracked that night, but it wasn't my heart, it was the part of me that still believed he'd come back around. I barely remember leaving the table. The food turned cold, the laughter never came back, and the night ended in silence so deep it pressed against my ribs. When I got home, I sat in the dark living room, staring at the ceiling fan turning slow and useless above me. I thought about the boy who cried when his turtle died, who held my hand at the dentist so I wouldn't be scared, who sang off-key in the back seat during every long drive. That boy had disappeared somewhere along the way. I tried to tell myself he was just angry, that Carol had gotten in his head again, whispering poison, but deep down I knew the truth. Brian didn't see me as his mother anymore. He saw me as a safety net he could kick whenever he felt small. That night I didn't cry. I didn't pray for understanding or scroll through old photos looking for signs I'd missed. I just sat there with the quiet realization that the person I'd spent my life saving was the same one tearing me apart. And then somewhere between one breath and the next, I decided something. If he could treat me like a burden, then maybe it was time he learned what it felt like to carry one. That night, after Brian's words had settled like dust in my chest, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. I kept hearing his voice, calm and cruel. "You're a loser, Mom." It wasn't the insult that hurt the most. It was the fact that he meant it. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw pieces of the past, little moments that had built this life. We shared the good and the bad, 3 years earlier, Brian had been at rock bottom. He'd lost his job again, third one that year, his apartment, his savings, and what was left of his confidence. His hair was greasy, his voice small, his shoulders slumped under invisible weight. He stood beside me at the car dealership holding the paperwork like it was a lifeline. I remember the way his eyes looked when he whispered, "Mom, you're saving me." And for a moment I believed it. I signed the check with shaky hands, dipping into my retirement fund, the money I'd saved for my medical bills, my peace of mind, maybe even a little travel after decades of working. But instead I used it to buy him that car, a used Camry that smelled like hope. The dealer handed him the keys. He hugged me so tightly I could feel his ribs pressing through that cheap jacket he always wore. He smiled for the first time in months. I took a picture that day, thinking it marked a new beginning. I saved that photo in my phone under favorites. It was proof to myself that all the sacrifices were worth it. But standing in my kitchen after that dinner, that same picture burned in my mind like a cruel joke, because the man sitting across from me tonight wasn't the boy from that photo. That boy had been grateful, humble, full of life. Somewhere along the way he turned into someone entitled, someone cold. And I had let it happen. I'd paid for his rent when he lost yet another job. I'd covered his groceries, his phone bills, even his legal fees once. I told myself it was what mothers do. We help our children get back on their feet. But each time I bailed him out, I was teaching him something dangerous, that I'd always be there no matter how badly he treated me. Love had turned into currency. Affection had become obligation. When you spend years rescuing someone, you start to believe that's the only way they'll ever love you. I thought being generous would keep us connected, but generosity without boundaries doesn't build love. It builds dependency. And dependency doesn't bring closeness. It brings resentment. Looking back, I realized I had raised Brian to believe my sacrifices were normal, even expected. He didn't see them as gifts. He saw them as maintenance fees for motherhood. That realization hit harder than his words at dinner, because when your own child stops saying thank you, when they stop seeing your help as kindness and start seeing it as your job, something inside you starts to die quietly. I remember the nights I'd sit in bed worrying about his bills while he went out drinking with friends. I remember lying to Sophia, telling her he's just going through a tough time, when deep down I knew it wasn't tough, it was habit. I thought I was protecting him from failure, but what I was really doing was protecting him from growth. That was my mistake. I'd been so focused on being a good mother that I forgot to be a person with limits. Love isn't supposed to hurt this much. It isn't supposed to drain you until you have nothing left to give. So as I lay there that night, replaying every dollar spent, every favor done, every apology swallowed, I finally asked myself the question I'd been avoiding for years. What kind of man had I raised? And worse, what kind of woman had I become to allow it? For a long moment I let that question hang in the dark like smoke. I thought about the quiet mornings, the unpaid bills, the unreturned phone calls, all the ways I'd let myself shrink just to make sure Brian stood tall. People like to say motherhood is sacrifice, but no one ever talks about the moment you realize your sacrifice has turned into self-erasure. That's when I knew something had to change. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even heartbroken anymore. I was done pretending that giving endlessly was love. The next morning I woke up before the sun. The house was still, the air cold. I poured myself a cup of black coffee, no cream, no sugar. I took a slow sip and felt something harden quietly inside me. It wasn't bitterness. It was clarity. If Brian saw me as weak, maybe it was because I'd spent too long proving I wasn't strong enough to say no. And, for the first time in years, I whispered to myself something that felt foreign but true. This ends now. The next morning I woke before the sun. The house was so still I could hear the hum of the refrigerator and the soft creak of the floorboards under my feet. I didn't turn on the lights. The darkness felt honest, like it finally matched how I felt inside. In the kitchen, I poured a cup of black coffee, no cream, no sugar, bitter, strong and simple. I used to start every morning with soft music and a phone call from Brian. There was always something he needed, gas money, rent, help, a small favor that never stayed small. But that morning, the phone stayed silent. And for once I was glad. I stood by the window watching the sky fade from deep blue to grey. Something inside me was changing. It wasn't breaking, it was hardening, finding shape. The part of me that used to bend for everyone else had gone still. I thought again about the word loser. The way he said it, flat and calm, like he believed it. The way Carol smirked from the end of the table, enjoying every second. That word didn't sting anymore. It clarified things. It showed me exactly where I stood in the family I had built with my own hands on the lowest rung of a ladder everyone else climbed. I took another sip of coffee and whispered to myself, enough. At that moment, I walked into my small study. The oak desk was cluttered with years of bills, receipts, and forgotten folders. Inside the drawers were reminders of every time I'd rescued Brian, mortgage payments, car receipts, utility bills. I pulled them out one by one. Each page felt heavier than paper should. I realized I hadn't kept those documents for accounting. I'd kept them for proof. Proof that I wasn't crazy, that my generosity had been real. Proof that I had done more than any mother should have to do. I began stacking the papers. Neatly mortgage, car, insurance, repairs, each one a receipt for love that had never been repaid. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger burns too fast. What I felt was quieter, steadier, a kind of peace that only comes after you stop fighting for people who don't care if you lose. I saw my own handwriting on one old envelope, just until he gets back on track. I almost laughed. How many tracks had I built for him? How many times had I believed the next one would finally lead somewhere different? I placed every document into a leather folder and closed it firmly. That sound, the snap of the clasp, felt final. For years I'd told myself Brian loved me, but that wasn't love. It was dependence dressed up as family loyalty. I looked at my reflection in the window. The woman staring back was older, yes, but sharper. The softness was gone. There was steel in her eyes now. The kind that comes from surviving your own kindness. I set the folder on the counter next to my untouched toast and whispered, this time he's going to learn what life really costs. That morning wasn't about revenge. It was about balance, about finally putting my name back where it belonged on my own life. As I cleaned the kitchen, I felt lighter. Every dish washed, every towel folded, felt like I was reclaiming tiny pieces of myself. By the time sunlight filled the room, nothing around me had changed, yet everything had. The switch wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no slammed doors, just a quiet shift, a decision to stop rescuing a man who refused to stand on his own. By the time I zipped that folder shut, I knew there was no turning back. The mother who always said yes had finally learned how to say no. And I meant it. The morning I decided to take everything back, the air felt different, quiet, but charged, like the world was waiting to see what I'd do next. I didn't rush. I dressed carefully, chose a simple blouse, tied my hair back, and slipped that thick leather folder into my bag. Inside it was every receipt title and payment record I had ever saved for Brian, proof that I wasn't crazy, proof that I had paid for all of it. I remember sitting in the car for a moment before starting the engine, hands steady on the wheel. For years I had driven to Brian's house with groceries, gifts, or money. That day I was driving there to reclaim what was mine. When I pulled up in front of his small ranch-style home, I didn't feel fear or guilt, just clarity. The lawn was overgrown, the curtains drawn. He had always said he'd fix the yard once things settled. They never did. I walked up the path, my heels crunching against the gravel. My heart didn't race. It beat slow and deliberate, like a clock finally keeping time again. When he opened the door, Brian looked half asleep, wearing the same wrinkled shirt from the night before. His eyes widened when he saw me. "Mom, what are you doing here?" I held out my hand. "Keys," I said. He blinked, confused. "What?" "The house keys." "The car keys," I repeated, calm and steady. He laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You're not serious." I didn't answer. I simply stepped inside and set the folder on his cluttered kitchen counter. I could smell stale beer and fast food. Bills were piled high unopened. It wasn't a home. It was a mess of excuses. He followed me in, still talking. "Mom, you gave me this house. You gave me that car. You can't just take them back because you're mad." I opened the folder and slid a document toward him. "I didn't give them to you," I said quietly. "I paid for them. They're in my name." He stopped laughing. He stepped closer, voice rising. "You're not thinking straight. You can't just—" I said, cutting him off. "And I am." I walked past him toward the driveway. He followed me barefoot now, yelling about how unfair it was. But I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even look back. The car sat where I'd left it 3 years ago, still dusty from neglect. My Camry, my money, my name on the registration. I pulled the paper from the folder and held it up. "You remember this?" I asked. "The day I bought this car, you said I was saving you. You were right, but I'm done saving you now." He looked around nervously. The neighbors were outside, one walking a dog, another fixing sprinklers. They pretended not to watch, but I could feel their eyes. For the first time he seemed embarrassed. "Mom, stop," he hissed. "You're making a scene." "No," I said evenly. "You made the scene when you forgot who paid for the ticket." I walked to the driver's side, opened the door, and set the registration on the seat. He stood frozen, angry and helpless. I could see it in his eyes, the panic of a man who realized his safety net was gone. "You can't do this to me," he said, voice trembling. "I have bills. I have responsibilities." "So do I," said, adjusting the mirror. "And for 35 years, mine included you." He took a step closer, desperate now. "Linda says you're losing it, that you need help." I rolled the window down and looked him straight in the eyes. "Then go live with Linda," I said. Let her help you. Let her pay your bills. Let her buy your next car. He opened his mouth to argue, but I started the engine. The familiar purr filled the air, a sound I'd almost forgotten. Reliable, steady, like me once I stopped apologizing for my strength. As I pulled out of the driveway, I saw him in the rearview mirror, barefoot, angry, shrinking smaller with every foot of distance. I didn't feel proud or vindicated. I felt free. Freedom doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it's just a set of keys and the sound of your own decision echoing your chest. At the first red light, I caught my reflection in the mirror. I didn't see a woman who'd taken something back. I saw a woman who'd finally stopped giving everything away. That day, I didn't just reclaim a house or a car. I reclaimed my boundaries, my dignity, my name. And when I drove off toward the bank to make it official, I realized something simple but powerful. When you stop being someone's safety net, you finally start living your own life. The morning after I took back the car, I didn't sleep much. My mind was too busy tracing old habits like muscle memory, trying to pull me backward. For decades, I'd made decisions out of fear that Brian would fall apart, fear that people would judge me for being a cold mother, fear that I'd be alone if I stopped giving. But fear, I realized, was just another leash I had allowed around my own neck. So I got dressed, tucked, the same leather folder under my arm, and drove downtown to the bank. It was the same building I had visited 100 times before, but today felt different. Today I wasn't there to pay another bill or fix another mistake. I was there to set myself free. The bank lobby was quiet, the air thick with that faint smell of paper and printer ink. Denise, a young teller who had helped me before, looked up from her desk and smiled politely. "Morning, Mrs. Hale. Making a payment today." "Not today," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I'm here to stop making them." She blinked, unsure if she heard me right. 10 minutes later, I sat across from her at a small desk. I slid the folder toward her, the documents neatly organized, the mortgage statements, the auto payments, the co-signed loans, proof of years spent carrying a grown man on my back. Denise scrolled through my account records, her brows knitting. "This is for your son's property, right? The one on Willow Avenue." "Yes," I said. "I'd like to end all automatic payments effective immediately." She hesitated. "Mrs. Hale, you're listed as a co-signer, not just a payer. Stopping these payments could trigger a default notice." I nodded. "I know. Then may I ask why you're doing this now?" I looked her straight in the eye. "Because he needs to learn what happens when you rely on other people to live your life." For a moment she didn't say anything. Then she gave a small nod, the kind you give when you recognize courage in someone who's just done something hard. She turned the screen toward me. "So you're sure you want to proceed?" "I've never been more sure." Her mouse clicked once, the sound sharp and final. On the screen, red letters appeared: automatic payments, cancelled. The words hit me like a quiet thunderclap. Denise stamped the notice and handed it over. "You'll get a confirmation letter within a few days. But be prepared, your son will be notified too." I gave a small smile. "I'm counting on it." When I walked out into the sunlight, the air felt lighter. For the first time in years, I wasn't walking on eggshells. I wasn't the fixer or the rescuer. I was simply a woman taking back her life, one document at a time. My phone buzzed before I even reached the parking lot. Brian. I let it ring. Then it buzzed again. Then again. By the fourth call, I answered. His voice was already sharp. Mom, what the hell did you do? I just got a notification that the payment failed. I stopped paying, I said. There was silence, then disbelief. You can't just stop. I have bills, a family. You're ruining my credit. I leaned against the car, feeling the cool metal under my hand. You're 35, Brian. If your credit depends on me, that's the problem. He shouted something about how I'd abandoned him, how Carol said I was dramatic, how I was overreacting to one bad night. I almost laughed. That wasn't one bad night, I said softly. That was the truth, finally slipping out. He tried again, his voice shaking. You've always helped me. That's who you are. Not anymore, I said. That's who I was. I'm not your safety net, Brian. I'm not your ATM. I'm not your excuse to stay stuck. He went quiet, and for a moment I thought I heard him breathe like he was trying not to cry. You don't understand, he said finally. I do. I told him. I just don't accept it anymore. When I hung up, my hands trembled, but not from guilt. It was adrenaline. Freedom has a strange taste the first time you let it touch your tongue. Not long after my ex-husband Richard called. His voice was low, careful, the way you talk to a bomb you're trying not to set off. Evelyn. Sorry, Margaret, he said. I just talked to Brian. He's devastated. What's going on? I smiled bitterly. What's going on is that I stopped funding your version of fatherhood. He sighed heavily. He's your son. You can't just cut him off. He's also your son, I said. But I don't see you writing the checks. He started to protest, but I interrupted. You raised him to believe life would always hand him a cushion. I'm the one who kept providing it. That ends now. There was a pause, then the familiar tone, the one that always came when he wanted control. You've always had to prove you're the strong one, he said. But this is cruel. No, I said quietly. Cruelty is teaching someone they can take without ever giving back. He hung up first. The silence afterward wasn't heavy this time. It was peaceful, almost sacred. For years I'd been afraid that if I stopped helping, I'd lose my family. What I learned instead was that real family doesn't vanish when the money stops. It's revealed by who stays when you have nothing left to give. That afternoon I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the porch, watching the light fade. The world looked exactly the same, but it felt brand new, because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for an apology, a thank you, or a phone call that never came. I had given enough. And this time I was keeping what was mine, my peace, my dignity, and my freedom. A few days after I stopped the payments, I met with my lawyer, Naomi Chen. She was sharp and steady, the kind of woman who didn't waste time on small talk. Her office smelled faintly of coffee and new paper, and her desk was lined with perfectly stacked folders that told me one thing: this woman lived for details. She greeted me with a firm handshake. You brought everything she asked. I placed my leather folder on her desk. Every receipt, every transfer, every bill I ever paid for Brian, I said. I want to make sure he can't twist this around. Naomi opened the folder and started flipping through the pages. She didn't speak for a while, only scanned, marked, and nodded quietly. After several minutes she looked up. Margaret, you've done your homework. Everything's clean, organized, and fully traceable. You're on solid legal ground. That was the first time in years someone told me I was solid. It felt strange. For so long I'd been made to feel unstable, emotional, dramatic words people use when they want to take away your power. Naomi leaned back in her chair. Now, you said Brian's been getting advice from Carol. I nodded. She's been behind most of it. She calls herself his mentor. Naomi smirked. Well, this mentor may have bigger problems than she realizes. She pulled out another folder, thinner, but stamped with something that made my stomach twist. Northview Atelier Carol's so-called fashion boutique. I ran a background check, Naomi said. Turns out her business owes over 100,000 in unpaid taxes. The IRS has already flagged her for suspicious deductions, travel labelled as supplier visits, jewellery filed as office expenses. It's not just sloppy, it's fraudulent. For a second, I didn't speak. I just stared at the papers. She's been bragging about that boutique for years, I said finally. Hosting wine tastings, showing off designer scarves, pretending she's self-made. Naomi tapped the page. It's smoke and mirrors. And here's the kicker, Brian co-signed one of her loans last year when she tried to expand inventory. If this goes under IRS review, his name will be right there next to hers. I sat back speechless. It was like watching two spiders trap themselves in their own web. Naomi's voice softened. You don't have to do anything yet. But if she keeps coming after you or tries to challenge your withdrawal of support, we'll have leverage. I exhaled slowly. So all this time she's been calling me unstable, and she's the one cheating the government. Naomi gave a small, knowing smile. People who manipulate others often assume they're smarter than everyone else. They forget that paper trails don't lie. She slid the folder toward me. Hold on to this. You won't need to swing it around, but it's power in your pocket. If they try to threaten you, remind them who really has something to lose. I nodded, but I didn't feel triumphant. What I felt was clarity, cold, clean, undeniable clarity. For years, Carol had made me question my memory, my judgment, even my sanity. But now the truth sat right in front of me, stamped and dated. Naomi closed her laptop and looked directly at me. Margaret, you don't have to play dirty. You already have the truth on your side. That's more than they can say. As I left her office, I carried both folders pressed against my chest, the proof of what I had done for Brian and the proof of what Carol had done to herself. Walking through the parking lot, I felt taller, not lighter, but stronger. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it hums quietly beneath your ribs, waiting for the moment you finally recognize it. That afternoon I drove home in silence. The sun was low, spilling orange light across the dashboard. I thought about how many years I'd been afraid to face the truth, how I'd accepted half-lies because they were easier to live with than the full picture. But not anymore. The truth, even when it hurts, has a strange way of setting you free. And that day it didn't just set me free. It reminded me that the people who once called me weak were already building their own downfall, one false claim at a time. It happened faster than I expected. 1 week, everything in Brian and Carol's world looked picture perfect. The next, it began to crumble, slowly, publicly, and in the most poetic way possible. I didn't cause it. I didn't make a single call. I just stepped out of the way and let consequences do what they always do when truth finally catches up. It started with a notice taped to the front door of the house on Maple Street. Bright red letters, impossible to miss, foreclosure, eviction in process. By noon, half the neighborhood had seen it. Some pretended not to look. Others walked slower just to take it in. That house, the one I'd helped Brian buy, now stood as a monument to his denial. I parked half a block away, engine off, watching as movers hauled out furniture I had once chosen with him. The couch with the faded floral pattern, the one he'd told everyone was a great deal from Craigslist, sat on the curb like a confession. Brian was outside pacing red-faced, yelling into his phone. He looked nothing like the smug man who'd called me a loser at dinner. His hair was messy, his voice cracked, his energy desperate. I almost didn't recognize him. I didn't feel proud. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt still. When someone spends years taking from you, you imagine that seeing them lose will feel satisfying, but when it actually happens, it feels quieter than you expect, like a storm that's finally passed. A few days later, the news about Carol's boutique broke. Northview Atelier was temporarily closed, according to the sign in the window. But people in town knew better. The IRS had frozen her accounts. Her payment processors, PayPal, Square, Shopify, all suspended. She couldn't move. Money couldn't sell, couldn't even take returns. Her world built on lies and image stopped spinning overnight. It didn't take long for the gossip to spread. The women from her wine night started whispering. One posted a review on Facebook that went viral. I paid $120 for a handmade Italian handbag from Carol's boutique. Found the exact same one online for $20. Guest designer means made in bulk these days. The internet did what it does best, tore her reputation apart, piece by piece. Someone on Reddit started a thread titled "Fake Fashion Queen Fakes Everything." Photos, receipts, screenshots, everything laid bare. And as the story spread, her supporters vanished. I heard that even Richard, my ex-husband, was getting uncomfortable. Questions at the golf club. One of his friends supposedly asked him during lunch, "So does your firm do your wife's taxes too?" I can imagine the look on his face. Poetic justice served quietly. I didn't post about it. I didn't gloat. I didn't tell anyone. See, I was right. I just watched from my little kitchen, stirring my coffee, knowing that for once the universe didn't need my help, delivering the lesson. The more they tried to paint me as the crazy one, the unstable one, the bitter old mother who couldn't let go, the faster the truth unfolded for everyone to see. It turns out when you stop covering for people, they reveal exactly who they are. Brian stopped calling after that. Maybe he didn't know what to say. Maybe he finally realized that the bridge he'd burned was never going to rebuild itself. Every now and then someone from the old neighborhood would mention they'd seen him thinner, quieter, keeping his head down. Carol apparently had moved out of their rental and gone back to her sister's house. Her brand had disappeared from social media. There was no announcement, no apology, just silence. That silence was everything I had wanted. I think deep down most of us want closure to look dramatic, to end with an apology, a confession, maybe even a breakdown that proves we were right. But real closure is smaller, it's quiet. It's just the day you wake up and realize you don't care what happens to them anymore. For years I believed that protecting my family meant fixing their mistakes. But sometimes protecting your family means letting their mistakes find them. That's the part no one tells you about love. It's not about saving people over and over again. Sometimes it's about watching them fall, hoping that this time they finally learn how to stand. So I let the world spin without my interference. I went back to my garden, planted marigolds by the fence, and drank my morning coffee on the porch without checking my phone. The world hadn't ended. It had simply reset, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a supporting character in someone else's chaos. I was my own story again. 2 months passed before I saw Brian again. Life had settled into something peaceful, quiet. Mornings, long walks, evenings spent reading instead of waiting for my phone to buzz with another crisis. I had almost forgotten what it felt like to live without anxiety pressing on my chest. Then one Sunday, Sophia invited me to her daughter's birthday dinner. Just a small family gathering, she said. Cake, laughter, no drama. I hesitated, but agreed. I didn't want my granddaughter's celebration shadowed by old wounds. The house smelled like cinnamon and vanilla frosting. The kids were running around, chasing balloons. For the first time in a while, the air felt light. I was talking with Sophia when the front door opened and the laughter dimmed for a second. Brian walked in. He looked different. Thinner, older, like life had been teaching him lessons the hard way. His clothes were wrinkled, his eyes tired. In his hands he carried a cheap bottle of wine and a paper-wrapped gift. "Hey," he said quietly. The room went still. Sophia gave me a searching glance, but I just nodded for her to carry on. Brian moved closer, awkward and unsure, like a man walking through fog. He greeted his sister, hugged the kids, and finally turned to me. "Mom," he said softly, almost like he was afraid of the word. I was wrong." He stood there waiting for me to rescue him again, to rush in with forgiveness, to pretend none of it had happened. That used to be our rhythm. He'd fall apart, I'd clean up. He'd apologize, I'd fold. But not this time. I looked at him, really looked at him. The boy who once held my hand at the dentist was gone. In his place stood a man who had built his own pain brick by brick. "I know," I said, finally. He looked startled, maybe even hopeful, like that single acknowledgement meant the door was open again. But I didn't move toward him. I stayed still. He took a small step closer. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't know where to start." "Start with respect," I said. "That's where love begins." "Apologies don't pay debts, Brian. Actions do." He swallowed hard and nodded, eyes glossy. "I'll try." "Good," I said. "Then don't talk about it. Just live better." For a moment we stood there in silence, surrounded by the sound of children's laughter from the next room. It wasn't uncomfortable, it was necessary. Sophia walked over, sensing the weight of the moment. She put a gentle hand on my shoulder. The kids came running in with frosting on their faces, shouting for candles. Life, as it does, moved on. Brian sat at the far end of the table that night. He didn't dominate the conversation. He didn't make excuses. He listened, really listened. When I looked at him, I saw something new, humility, maybe even growth. I wasn't sure yet, and I didn't need to be. Some lessons take time to stick. Later that evening, when everyone had left, I sat alone by the fireplace. The flames flickered against the old family photos on the mantel. My eyes fell on one in particular, Brian at 10 years old, dirt on his cheeks. A treehouse behind him, smiling like the world was still simple. That boy was gone. But as I watched the firelight dance on his face in that photo, I realized something. The woman who had spent years saving him was gone too. In her place was someone stronger, someone who had learned that peace isn't about fixing others, it's about freeing yourself from their chaos. I took a slow sip of tea and smiled. Not a triumphant smile, not an "I told you so," just a quiet one. Because real victory doesn't shout, it doesn't need to prove anything, it just lives in the calm that follows when you finally reclaim your life. That night, I turned off the lights, the photo of Brian still glowing faintly in the fading firelight. I whispered a small prayer, not for him to change, but for both of us to finally live differently. And for the first time in years, I went to bed without waiting for the phone to ring.